Hey guys, it's that time again. I got a bunch of stories for you today. The first one will be a short one about a druid who refused to learn. This is part horror story and part question. What is the longest that you've ever put up with, or see the GM put up with, an inexperienced player who just refuses to learn the rules? I had a campaign where, after 35 sessions and more than a year of a Pathfinder campaign, one player, who was playing a druid, still did not know how to prepare spells, know how to cast spells, and know what spells they had access to. Basically every action they took that required a roll, the GM would have to tell them what roll to make. And at one point in the middle of combat, on their turn, they were flipping through the rulebook to see what spells druids had, and they decided that they wanted to cast Stone Tell, which was a spell that they hadn't prepared, and weren't high enough level to cast. And it takes 10 minutes to cast. All because they had read the description and thought it sounded neat. In the end, the GM allowed it because he assumed that they wouldn't ask to cast a spell that they weren't able to cast. Oh, by the way, the GM and the player were dating. Well guys, that's the end of the first story. The next one up is going to be about some lighthearted antics. This is a lot more lighthearted than some of the stories that I've seen on here. In fact, it might not even be strictly a horror story, but it was definitely my own personal horror story. So a few years back, I ran Minds of Phandelver for a group of friends who had never played any TTRPG before. We had a nice session 0, and everyone had their characters. I explained what D&D was, and what the basic rules were, and I set them outside of Neverwinter, on their way to Phandalin. Everything was great. The players introduced their characters with some awkward but enthusiastic role-playing, and before they started down the road, one turned to me and said, "Wait, so we can do anything?" Well, you can try to do pretty much anything. Some things might be impossible, though. I want to go back into Neverwinter and steal some fancy wine for the road trip. With this, the entire party's eyes lit up at this suggestion, and they all started chattering about this pre-adventure bonding activity. Now, something I failed to mention until this point, I am a baby DM with some pretty bad social anxiety. I had had the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide for a while, but thanks in large part to anxiety, I never had a group to play with. And by this I mean that this is my very, very literal first time ever playing a TTRPG in my entire life. I prepped the bejeebus out of this campaign, except for the giant city that they were never meant to go into. The group was clearly excited, and I wanted to make this a great first session, so I, on the edge of a panic attack, pull a mini half-hour wine heist out of my bum, resulting in them getting chased out of town by some shockingly slow guards, who, for some strange reason, stopped chasing them once they were out of the city. My friends were all smiles, and clearly proud of their achievement, and they excitedly roleplayed passing the wine around as they traveled down the road and finally started the campaign, while I was a nervous, shaky, sweaty mess for the rest of the session. Well, that was an awfully short one, and all things considered, like the OP even acknowledged, this really is pretty lighthearted. I just hope for this newbie DM that this party's actually okay and they keep the antics to a relative calm. Alright guys, that's the end of the second one. The third one will be about a group that wanted to start a D&D podcast. So, I'll try to keep the context for this one short, as I have a tendency to ramble. April, last year, a few friends and I decided to start a Discord voice chat D&D table to battle early quarantine boredom. There was 7 of us in total, with me DMing, and because we could all play from the comfort of our houses, scheduling was super easy, for the first time in RPG history. And we played weekly for some 3 to 4 months. So around this time, we had the very so much original idea of starting a D&D podcast. doing some audio dramas out of our sessions, and we decided that some editing would be required, since we tended to ramble a lot mid-session to talk about our lives, since quarantine and we weren't seeing anyone. And we decided to go the extra mile and add in sound effects. In the beginning, everyone was hyped about it, as we were quite bored and this seemed like a nice thing to take the edge off, and as an extra excuse to hang out. But one of our friends, who we'll call Robert, got really hyped about it, spinning high tales of what we would do if we got big, while the rest of us were more excited about making it and didn't really expect it to get anywhere, as it would just be another drop in the ocean. So, cut to the first session after we planned, and we decided that we'd wrap up the current arc and start the program after they killed the current BBEG, and moving on to new adventures. Then Robert said he wanted to go shopping for magical items, which was a rare occurrence, as they tended to go together and pool the gold for it. Anyway, he went to the local store and just went wild on asking if the shopkeeper could make custom items that didn't exist in the books, and if she could enchant items. She told him that she would look into it, and I told Robert that we would have to talk about those later, as I hadn't planned for it, and wanted to balance them out. Robert got a bit grumbly, but said that he would text me after the session. The rest of the session went fine, although some of the players did message me that they thought it was a little bit weird. After the session, he texted me the proposed items, which were basically Hand of Vecna powerful, especially for a level 7 party. I shot them all down, much to his own dismay, and I proposed ones that were appropriate to his level, and he accepted it begrudgingly. Next up, he asked me if he could change his character's background to be the bastard son of the king of the setting's elven kingdom, instead of a lone noble as he had been before, and if the draconic bloodline could be someone of a recent generation, like his mother. So in summary, he wanted to turn his character from a pariah, born from a baron, to the son of a king with a dragon. No need to say that it was a big no. In the next session, more and more of this type of behavior occurred. And not only that, but he started to try to lead the charge in dungeon crawls and combat, sticking himself on the front line in combat, and getting over everyone to roll checks, i.e. trying to pick locks instead of letting the rogue do it. We were all getting really fed up with this change, and something to take into account, he was actually a really good player before this. But you have to be wondering what this has to do with starting a podcast. Well, after the third session of him behaving like this, one of the people at the table, who played another elf who was his traveling partner before the campaign started, in character-wise, told me that he had messaged him a lot about the podcast, and said that he wanted to be Paul, not Ringo, and was spotlight hogging in preparation of wanting to be the main character when we started to make episodes. As I prepared to deal with it, and considered just shutting the idea down, Destiny did it for me. As another player said, he was dealing with anxiety issues, and didn't feel comfortable with publishing our sessions. So I scrapped the podcast idea, as it was meant as a way of having fun, above all else. Robert ended up quitting the party very shortly after, saying that he wanted more time to study for college. As of today, we're still playing, and we can see that he's streaming on Twitch to like 12 people in the time that we're usually playing. Well guys, I don't really have too much to say on this one. The only thing I can really think of is if the OP didn't even suggest the podcast idea to begin with, then they probably would still be playing the campaign just fine, and seeming as how Robert excused himself after a while anyway, there's a very good chance that he would have removed himself from the group to do some more studying and Twitch streaming. But overall, nothing particularly bad happened here, and the DM at least said that he was going to fix the issue. The moral of the story is just don't be an attention hog, and if you do a D&D podcast or any type of podcast in a general sense, don't expect it to get anywhere. Usually it takes a very long amount of time and a lot of effort for any of them to really get anywhere. It's not exactly an overnight fame type of thing, although outliers do exist to that. Alrighty guys, that's the end of number 3. We're on to the 4th one, which is the last one, and is about a rather short-tempered player. So, this summary was written up by one of my players, and if anyone has any advice for handling this in the future, I would really appreciate it. The testimony. Before this game commenced, Red had commented that he had been kicked out of other D&D groups, and while this did raise some flags, the other players elected to overlook it in favor of a good game. However, there was then an altercation between 2 of the players in-game. Red had scavenged some items, and another player said that they wanted to keep a scimitar for themselves, so that he wouldn't have it all. Red responded that he was going to divide it, but now he wouldn't give one to this player. Before, this had all been in character. However, Red then said that he didn't like how this player was playing the game. This player apologized, and said that he was operating on the fact that he had taken out one of the goblins himself, and that Red hadn't had the chance to take it. Overall, the situation was diffused. Red, in character, was lingering behind the group, upset at this other character, and that was all. There was then a 15-minute bathroom break, and during this break, the DM left the voice chat, and after a while, another player then mentioned that the previous incident had made the campaign rather dramatic. Red responded to explain his rationale, and while the situation was uneasy, the party resolved to move on. Red then said that he needed to leave to take pictures of his daughter, and left the voice chat. The other members of the party then decided to show off their emojis, and the DM then came back during his absence. I let her know in voice chat that he would be right back, and that he was taking pictures of his daughter. Another player also talked at the same time, and said that they didn't like his playing style. The DM then said, "Well, obviously his focus should be on the game, not on his daughter," before she had the chance to explain that she was being sarcastic. Red had come back and heard both the interjection and the comment. His daughter was there and also heard. I then told everyone that Red had come back. Red was unhappy and drew the conclusion that the DM was not sarcastic, and that the players were talking behind his back. The DM was horrified and immediately apologized. Unfortunately, all apologies and explanations from the DM, and then the other players, were not enough to assuage him. Red then did not leave the Discord. He expressed his unhappiness and began to swear at the game members. The DM was a very new one, unfamiliar to managing a Discord server and to hosting on Roll20, and in trying to figure out how to remove Red, she clicked around and accidentally blocked him abruptly on Discord. Red turned to the Roll20 chat, and the DM apologized again to Red in the Roll20 chat, and then managed to remove him from the game. Well guys, that's all she wrote. I have no idea what was in that attachment, as the OP never really left an image or link or any other sort of easy way of seeing what that attachment was. But if you see red flags, you probably shouldn't ignore them, and something you need to remember with this story as well is this isn't wrote from the OP's perspective. This is another player's perspective. So, in this case, the DM is the OP, so the OP is the one who made the comment of Red not focusing on the game. So, the takeaway here is don't be sarcastic with people that you don't know, as they might go off the deep end like this fellow. And don't say things when people aren't there and can come back at any time and misconstrue what you were saying. Alright guys, that's all I have for today. Hopefully you enjoyed all of the stories, and as always, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and have a good one.